It's terrible that after 50 years, it is behind closed doors.
5 minutes ago, the palace was shaken by a decision so personal it cut deeper than protocol. Prince William reclaimed Diana's wedding band from the royal vault, and Queen Camilla was denied access before she could even step inside. It was not just a jewel being moved. It was memory, loyalty, grief, and power colliding behind a locked door no one expected to become the center of a royal storm. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stood in silence as the small case was brought forward, and nothing about the moment felt ordinary. The royal vault, a protected chamber where deeply symbolic family pieces are kept under strict control, had held crowns, brooches, letters, and private objects that carried more emotion than any official record could explain. Diana's wedding band was different. It was not a decoration. It was not a ceremonial prize. It was the gold circle that had once carried vows, pain, separation, motherhood, and memory all at once. When the vault officer placed the case before the prince, he did not reach for it quickly. He stared at it as if one wrong movement could disturb something sacred. Then the order was confirmed. William had personally removed the band from the vault records and transferred it under his own authority. Camilla was not to enter. Camilla was not to review it. Camilla was not to touch the file. Camilla arrived moments later expecting routine access, but the corridor had already changed. The queen consort stopped when a senior aide stepped forward and told her the authorization had been withdrawn. She did not answer at first. Her face hardened, then shifted into something quieter, something wounded. This was no scheduling error. This was no forgotten signature. The aide held the notice with both hands, and on it was the future king's name, firm and unmistakable. William had drawn the line himself. For Camilla, that line did more than block a door. It told her there were still rooms in royal life, where title could not erase history, and where Diana's shadow remained stronger than rank. William looked down at the sealed instruction attached to the ring file, and the silence around him deepened. The instruction suggested the band had never been meant to be treated as ordinary royal property, never folded into display plans or palace messaging. It belonged to a memory too fragile to be managed like an heirloom. Then Charles received the first alert, and the king understood the danger at once. William had acted before the household could soften it, before advisors could reshape it, before anyone could protect the family from the shock now moving through the palace. But before the palace could understand why William moved so suddenly, everyone had to face the people whose hearts were tied to that small gold band. At the center of this crisis were not committees, vault codes, or palace schedules. There were people. William, carrying the wound of a son who never stopped protecting his mother's memory. Camilla, facing a rejection that felt painfully public even behind closed doors. Charles, trapped between peace and bloodline loyalty. And Catherine, watching the man beside her step into a storm he had avoided for years. William did not move like a man chasing control. He moved like a son who had waited too long to protect what still felt painfully unfinished. The prince knew Diana's wedding band was not just a private object from the past. The royal vault, the secure palace chamber, where family jewels and personal treasures are kept under official watch, had turned that small band into something surrounded by rules, keys, signatures, and permissions. That mattered, because the more the palace handled it like property, the less it felt like memory. William wanted it separated from court politics before anyone could turn it into a message, a display, or a quiet act of replacement. Camilla understood the refusal in a very different way. The queen consort saw access as recognition. To enter that protected space meant belonging not just to the palace, but to the family story it guarded. When she was stopped, the wound landed where no public title could protect her. She knew the denial was not about one ring alone. It exposed a hidden divide inside the household. Who was accepted by rank, and who was trusted with grief. Camilla had survived years of judgment, but this was sharper. This was rejection, written into palace procedure. Charles received the first briefing in his private study, and the page seemed heavier than paper. The king lowered it slowly, his silence saying what his words could not. He understood at once that this was not jewelry returning to family care. This was old pain rising again, the kind he had spent years trying to keep beneath polished duty. A briefing, in palace language, is a formal update given to senior royals so they know what has happened and what must happen next. But this one did not feel formal. It felt personal. Charles looked at William's signature and knew his son had acted from a place no advisor could easily reach. Catherine saw William before the vault meeting and quietly asked whether he was ready. The Princess of Wales, the title given to the wife of the Prince of Wales and carrying Diana's old public shadow, understood the emotional weight before anyone explained it. William answered with brutal honesty. He said he might never be ready. Then the ring file revealed the phrase, "restricted family memory," and everything changed. Camilla's denial was no accident. William's grief had found proof, and the answer lay not in the vault itself, but in a private ceremony where one careless request turned grief into action. The crisis did not begin at the vault door. It began weeks earlier, during a private remembrance ceremony for Diana inside Kensington Palace, when one request turned the room silent. Camilla asked whether the wedding band could be brought out for a future royal display. William heard the words, watched the faces around him freeze, and understood in that instant that memory was no longer safe behind protocol. William did not react at once, and that made the silence worse. The prince stayed still, while Catherine noticed his hand tighten around the edge of his chair. She knew that look. She had seen it before, when grief did not explode, but locked itself behind his eyes. The remembrance ceremony, a private family gathering held to honor someone's life away from public crowds, was meant to keep Diana's memory gentle. That mattered, because the band was not being discussed as a public object before strangers. It was being raised inside a room where her sons were supposed to feel safe remembering her as a mother, not as a royal symbol. Camilla framed the request carefully. The Queen Consort said the wedding band could help tell a fuller historical story in a future display, and on the surface, the words sounded controlled. A royal display simply means a planned public presentation of family items for history, ceremony, or national memory. But William heard something colder. He heard Diana's most intimate symbol being pulled into palace machinery, polished into meaning, and placed where people could speak around it without feeling what it had cost. Camilla looked toward Charles after she spoke, and the king understood that the room had changed. Charles tried to soften the moment. He said the matter could be reviewed later, but his hesitation landed like confirmation. William heard delay where he needed protection. Catherine watched the prince lower his gaze, and she knew he had not forgiven the pause. The king wanted peace, but peace felt too close to surrender. Camilla remained composed, yet even she sensed that her request had crossed a line no title could repair. The Queen Consort had asked for access to history. William believed she had reached for memory. William learned the full danger days later through a documented account from a retired vault registrar who informed him that the wedding band had been quietly flagged for reassessment after that ceremony. The registrar, a former official responsible for tracking protected royal items, explained that reassessment meant an object could be reviewed for future use, display, or classification. Then the prince found the sealed family note attached to Diana's inventory record, warning that certain personal items must never become instruments of royal messaging. William read it once, then again, and from that moment, the confrontation was no longer avoidable. So when Camilla finally came face to face with William, the argument was no longer about access. It was about who had the right to touch Diana's memory. The confrontation came in a narrow private corridor outside the vault offices, where no cameras waited, and no public smiles were required. Camilla asked why her access had been suspended. William did not raise his voice. That made the moment worse. He looked at her, held the ring file in one hand, and told her the wedding band would not be reviewed, displayed, borrowed, or touched. Camilla stared at him, as if the words had struck harder than any public insult. The Queen Consort had arrived after being denied entry, expecting an explanation that could still be corrected, softened, or blamed on procedure. Instead, She found William standing with the file already in his possession, his face calm in the way grief becomes calm when it has finally made a decision. The vault office, the administrative room where access records and family item approvals are handled, mattered because it was the last gate before memory became paperwork. And this denial did not apply to the entire royal collection, meaning the palace's wider jewels and historic pieces. It applied specifically to Diana's wedding band and the private items connected to her life. Camilla asked whether she was now being treated as an outsider inside her own palace life. Her voice was controlled, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. She had spent years standing beside Charles, carrying the weight of judgment, waiting for history to stop punishing her. Yet William's refusal told her something brutal. A crown could open staterooms. It could command ceremony. It could place her beside the king, but it could not give her free passage into Diana's memory. The queen consort understood that, and the understanding wounded her more than the locked door. William answered with controlled pain. The prince said some things belong to sons before they belong to institutions. He did not accuse her. He did not soften the sentence either. Camilla challenged him then, asking whether Charles had approved what he was doing. William looked down at the signed order and said the decision had been issued under heir authority tied to family custodianship. Heir authority meant the future monarch's limited right to protect certain family matters before they become public or ceremonial decisions. Family custodianship meant personal responsibility over private royal belongings, especially those carrying deep emotional weight. An aide nearby watched Camilla's expression change when she realized the refusal was not temporary. It was formal. It was written. It would not disappear after one difficult conversation. William held the ring file closer, and the corridor seemed to tighten around them. Camilla had come seeking access, but she left carrying the proof that trust and title were not the same thing. And that question led straight into the hidden machinery of royal power, where signatures mattered less than trust. Behind the emotional confrontation was a colder truth. The palace had rules for crowns, brooches, portraits, and records. But Diana's wedding band sat in a category no one wanted to name. It was not merely royal property, it was a wound in gold. And when William claimed custodial authority over it, the entire household discovered that sentiment could become power when written into the right file. William knew the decision would not stay emotional for long. The prince understood that once Camilla challenged him, the matter would move from grief into authority, from pain into paper. His power came through a special family custodianship framework, a private arrangement that gives selected royals responsibility over deeply personal items connected to family memory. That mattered because Diana's wedding band was not being treated like a crown jewel for ceremony or display. It was tied to motherhood, marriage, loss, and the private inheritance of her sons. William did not need to own the monarchy to protect it. He needed one valid file, one signed order, and one boundary strong enough to survive pressure. Charles remained sovereign, and that title meant he was the reigning monarch with the highest formal authority in the royal household. But even the king could feel the difference between ruling a crown and touching a wound. Charles sat with the document alone, removed his glasses, and whispered that this should have been settled years ago. He read the line marking Diana's wedding band as not for ceremonial reinterpretation, and the words hit like a warning. Palace advisors understood the phrase at once. It meant the ring could not be reshaped into a display, a tribute, a gesture, or a public message. It had to remain itself. William struggled with that burden more than anyone knew. The prince had acted against Camilla, but he had also acted against the silence Charles had tried to preserve. He knew the king wanted old wounds buried beneath duty, but some wounds do not disappear just because a palace learns not to mention them. William's pain was controlled, yet it was not cold. He was not trying to punish the queen consort for every shadow of the past. He was trying to stop one final piece of Diana from being folded into a story she could no longer refuse. Catherine's name appeared quietly as a secondary witness to the transfer, and that detail changed the temperature in the room. The Princess of Wales was not taking control from William. She was standing beside him, confirming that the ring's future would remain within his immediate family line. When the paperwork was sealed, the decision hardened into fact. Then Camilla received the final notice, and the fallout began instantly. What had been a private decision now became a personal defeat, and Camilla's reaction would shake the rooms no announcement could reach. For Camilla, the worst part was not the locked vault. It was the silence after the refusal. No crowd, no statement, no public scandal yet. Just a closed door, a withdrawn clearance, and the unbearable knowledge that William had drawn a line she could not cross. In that quiet moment, the Queen Consort understood that some parts of the royal family would never fully belong to her. Camilla walked away from the vault corridor with the notice still in her hand. The Queen Consort had received written confirmation that her access to Diana's wedding band file was denied, and the words felt colder each time she looked at them. A clearance, in simple palace terms, is official permission to enter a protected space or review restricted material. That mattered because this was not a social slight or a passing disagreement. It was a formal removal of trust, written into the system where staff could see it, follow it, and never question it. Camilla had been refused by a son protecting his mother, but she had also been refused by the palace machine itself. Camilla sat alone in a private sitting room and read the notice twice before placing it face down on the table. She did not cry. That would have been easier. Instead, the Queen Consort sat with the kind of hurt that has no clean place to go. Outside that room, palace staff had been instructed to avoid discussion, and that silence became its own punishment. Staff instructions are quiet orders, given to palace employees, so sensitive matters do not spread or become public. But silence does not erase humiliation. It only makes it echo louder. Camilla knew every lowered voice meant people already understood what had happened. Charles entered quietly, and the room tightened before he spoke. The king tried to offer calm, but Camilla looked at him and asked whether he knew his son would humiliate her this directly. Charles did not answer fast enough. That pause told her more than comfort ever could. He admitted William had acted before asking for personal approval, yet he did not reverse the order. The monarch could have challenged it. The husband could have defended her. But the father understood why his son had done it, and that understanding wounded Camilla more deeply than William's anger. Camilla realized the deepest blow was not the locked door. It was Charles refusing to fight the decision. The Queen Consort had expected pain from William, but not surrender from the king. Across the palace, advisors braced for a family rupture, fearing one private denial could become a lasting fracture. Then Catherine stepped toward the center of the crisis, not with force, but with quiet resolve. But the turning point did not come from a council, a memo, or a royal command. It came from two people speaking without anyone else in the room. Late that evening, after the palace had gone still, William and Catherine sat together with Diana's wedding band between them in its small protective case. There were no advisors, no formal language, and no one to translate pain into policy. For the first time all day, William stopped sounding like an heir. He sounded like a son, deciding what love must protect. William did not open the case. The prince only looked at it, as if the smallest movement might turn memory into something too painful to hold. Catherine sat close enough to feel the weight of his silence, yet careful enough not to rush him through it. The transfer, a formal move of a protected item from one authority to another, had already been completed. That mattered, because the decision could no longer be dismissed as anger in a corridor. It had become a family act, written down, witnessed, and sealed. But Catherine knew something else mattered too. If this stayed only about keeping Camilla out, the ring would remain trapped inside bitterness. William admitted the truth in a low voice. He feared the band would become a palace object, cleaned of pain, softened by ceremony, and spoken about by people who never felt Diana's absence the way he had. The prince said he could not bear the thought of his mother's last private symbol becoming part of a display, a bargain, or a public gesture. Catherine listened without interrupting. The Princess of Wales, a title now carrying both duty and Diana's shadow, understood that protecting memory required tenderness as much as strength. She told William that love could guard a boundary without turning the heart into stone. Catherine's words changed the room. She reminded him that Diana's memory did not need revenge to survive. It needed dignity. William looked again at the unopened case, and the anger that had carried him through the day began to settle into something steadier. The prince understood then that the wedding band had to be protected privately, not because Camilla had been denied, but because Diana deserved peace beyond palace use. That difference mattered. One path kept the wound open, the other gave it meaning. William signed the final family instruction with a hand that did not shake. The document, a written order setting how an item must be protected, named the ring as a protected maternal heirloom, meaning a private object preserved through the mother's family line and not used for royal presentation. Catherine added her witness mark beside his, quietly confirming that this was no longer just refusal. It was preservation. By morning, private grief would become a public story no palace statement could fully control. And once the first headline appeared, the palace discovered that the country had already chosen what this moment meant. By sunrise, the story had escaped the palace walls. Britain did not see a technical vault dispute. It saw Diana's wedding band, William's grief, Camilla's exclusion, and a son drawing a boundary around his mother's memory. The reaction was immediate, fierce, and deeply emotional. For millions, the decision felt less like punishment and more like protection long overdue. William woke to a country already speaking his pain out loud. The prince had not given a speech, and he had not tried to explain himself through polished palace language, but the meaning had traveled faster than any official statement. Broadcasters opened their morning programs with the same question. Why had Diana's wedding band become the line no one could cross? A broadcaster, in simple terms, is a television or radio presenter who frames major stories for the public. That mattered because this was no longer only a family matter. Once the public heard that Camilla had been denied access, the story became about memory, loyalty, and whether the monarchy could protect the woman people still felt had never been fully defended. Camilla saw the first newspaper before breakfast, and the headline cut through the room. William draws the line. Beside it was the image of a simple gold ring, not a crown, not a palace balcony, not a state jewel. The queen consort understood at once why the picture was so powerful. It made the crisis human. It showed the country that the object at the center of everything was small, private, and painfully ordinary. Camilla could argue with procedure. She could challenge access rules. But she could not easily fight the public feeling attached to Diana's name. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace, and the silence there carried its own message. Some placed white flowers near the gates as a quiet tribute, while others stood without speaking, as if the story had pulled an old grief back into the present. Kensington Palace, the royal residence strongly linked to Diana's life and public memory, mattered because people did not go there for politics. They went there to remember. William's decision had reached them not as a palace order, but as a son's refusal to let one final symbol be reshaped by the institution that had once failed his mother. Charles listened as one broadcaster called it the most personal royal boundary William had ever set since becoming Prince of Wales. The king knew those words would stay. Palace aides quickly realized the public mood was firmly with William, and any reversal would look not like fairness, but betrayal. Camilla's defeat had become William's protection. And with the country watching, the final question was no longer who won, but what the monarchy had learned from the wound. And when the noise finally settled, one truth remained stronger than every headline, every denial, and every locked palace door. In the end, Diana's wedding band did what royal objects rarely do. It stripped away ceremony and exposed the human heart beneath the crown. William reclaimed it, not as a prince chasing power, but as a son protecting memory. Camilla was denied access, not simply because of rank, but because some wounds cannot be healed by titles, and some symbols cannot be shared without breaking them. William's order stood, and that was the final turning point. The prince had not only removed the ring from the vault process, he had removed it from every future display consideration, every ceremonial plan, every quiet attempt to turn Diana's private life into public storytelling. A display consideration, in plain terms, is when palace officials review whether an item can be shown or used for public history. That mattered because the wedding band was not being judged for beauty or historic value anymore. It was being protected for meaning. It belonged to grief, motherhood, and memory before it belonged to monarchy. Charles accepted the decision with visible sadness. The king understood that William had guarded a part of Diana he himself had failed to protect when it mattered most. He did not say that in a speech. He did not need to. His silence carried the confession. Charles knew the final instruction was more than paperwork. A final family instruction means a written order that sets how a private family item must be treated from that moment forward. This one made the truth clear. Diana's wedding band would remain private, untouched, and protected for the next generation. Camilla retreated from the fight, wounded but aware that pushing harder would only deepen the divide. The queen consort had lost access, but she had also seen the country's reaction, Charles' hesitation, and William's unshakable resolve. She understood that forcing the issue would not make her stronger, it would make the wound wider. And for once, the palace did not ask Diana's memory to bend for comfort. It asked everyone else to step back. Catherine's role as witness gave the decision its quiet strength. The Princess of Wales had not turned William's pain into revenge. She helped turn it into preservation. Her signature beside his showed that this was not rage written in gold. It was family protection, shaped by love, restraint, and hard-earned peace. William had drawn the boundary, but Catherine helped make it honorable. The monarchy survived the crisis, not by pretending the past was painless, but by admitting that memory has boundaries even crowns must respect. Diana's wedding band remained where it belonged, beyond display, beyond rivalry, beyond palace use. The vault closed again, but this time, it did not hide the truth. It protected it, and everyone inside the monarchy knew exactly why. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.